Today, I'll show you how to master reading music with both clefs at the same time. And to accomplish this, we're going to start out with the best note reading strategies available, and then we're going to build on that with strategies on tackling both clefs at the same time. In order to master both clefs together, you're going to have to master them separately, starting with the lines and spaces of each clef. A lot of you know this already, so I'm going to do it in 10 seconds. Lines of the treble clef from the bottom to the top are E, G, B, D, F. Spaces spell face from the bottom to the top. Lines of the bass clef from the bottom to the top are G, B, D, F, A, and spaces are A, C, E, G. I recommend practicing your lines and spaces by going to musictheory.net and clicking on Exercises and selecting the Note Identification exercise. And make sure only notes on the staff are selected in the options. After you master your lines and spaces, you're also going to have to master lining up the notes on the sheet music with the notes on the piano. And let me show you how that works. So not only do you have to know that this is an E, you have to know that this E is right here on the piano. And I know that right away based on where middle C is. So middle C is here on the staff. And one thing I want you to pay attention to is if we move up to this E, we are actually moving up two notes. So there's C, there's D, and there's E. So if it's two notes up on the staff, it's also two notes up on the keyboard. So the lines of the treble clef are actually right here, right above middle C. E, G, B, D, F. And the spaces actually are right here. F, A, C, E. Always be thinking, where is this note in relation to middle C on the staff? And that'll make it much easier translating it onto the piano. But you got to be careful of the bass clef. So with the bass clef, middle C is actually on a line above the staff. And if you think about it, it makes sense, right? Because with the bass clef, we are basically playing down on the bass notes of the piano. So you'd expect middle C to be high up on the staff to give you plenty of room to count down this way. And you got to be careful because the first line of the bass clef is actually way down here. So as you notice, there's quite a distance between that note and middle C. And guess what? That distance is going to translate on the piano. So here's middle C. So the G we're looking for probably isn't here. It's probably going to be one G down here. Big distance, big distance. So the lines of the bass clef are right here. G, B, D, F, A. And the spaces are going to be right here. A, C, E, G. And you notice we hit this top space G here, which is right here on the staff. And that is pretty close to middle C. And so it makes sense. So here's what middle C looks like on both staffs, and these are actually the same note. But why do they look separated? Why do they do that to us? Why do they make things confusing on purpose? Well, there is a purpose, and think about it like this. It's because if these two clefs were right together in that same note, there would be a spacing issue because any notes going above here would actually start going into the treble clef territory. So they create this space here so that it doesn't get all cluttered. So what I want you to do is when you're doing the musictheory.net exercises that I was talking about a second ago, you not only want to find the correct letter note, you actually want to find where it is on the piano. Now, why was that F way up there? Well, if you think about it, middle C was below the staff, and this is quite a distance. And remember, the distance is reflected in both the sheet music and on the piano. So we got through all the basic note reading techniques. Let's talk about some more advanced ones like the ledger line technique. Ledger lines help us figure out what note we're on and where we are when notes go high up or far below on the staff. And the first ledger line we talked about was middle C, right there. And these trip a lot of students up because it can be, especially when you have a lot of ledger lines, it can be really hard to count up where you are, and it takes a lot of time. It confuses a lot of people. However, I have two rules to keep in mind so that you can master these ledger line notes in just like 2 minutes. Rule number 1, the lines of a staff are equal to the spaces going up off the staff starting from the top space. So if the lines of the treble clef are E, G, B, D, F, these spaces, remember, starting from the top space, are E, G, B, D, F. So using this rule, you know right away that that one way up there, crazy far up there, is an F. And the opposite is true. The lines of a staff are also equal to the spaces going down below the staff, starting from the bottom space. However, you got to be careful, and I'll tell you why. This time we are actually going down. So what that means is that the note order is actually in reverse. So we're actually doing F, D, B, G, E. And this is F, D, B, G, E, way down there. Ledger line rule number 2. The spaces of a staff, remember we were talking about lines before, but spaces on the staff, ready for it, are equal to the lines going up off the staff, starting from that top line. So if right here is FACE, guess what? This is FACE. Now remember, the opposite is also true if we move them way down here to the bottom line. But remember, what do you have to be careful of? We're counting down this time, so it's actually in reverse order. Instead of FACE, it's ECAF from the top to the bottom, which means this is also ECAF. Just like before, you can go to musictheory.net, same thing, but this time you can start to select those ledger lines and practice those now that you know the rules. So now that you know the ledger line rules, there's one more important thing I got to teach you before we actually get to reading both clefs at the same time. And the other thing you have to master is chord identification. A chord is when you play basically 3 or more notes at the same time on a piano. And it really helps to be able to identify these chords, not only on the piano real quick. Oh, there's a G major chord, F major, B flat major. You need to be that good. You also need to recognize them on the staff. And that's because you're going to see these in your music all the time. And if you can identify it from sight, well, guess what? You got those notes filled in already. And that's going to help a lot with playing both clefs at the same time. So for instance, a C major chord I played a second ago would look like this on the piano. And like the point is you look at that, you're like, boom, got them. So then your right hand notes are pretty much, free for the picking so that you can focus on those. When you start reading both clefs at the same time, it's like playing both hands at the same time. It is a skill in and of itself. So like the more of the pieces that you can put together ahead of time, then it will be much, much easier when putting things together all at once. So learn your chords, and actually I have a very cool resource I want to tell you about. So if you type into Google piano chord chart, you're going to see a lot of chord charts pop up, and these are absolutely amazing. I do like this School of Rock one though. It just makes things a little bit simpler. You might have to scroll down a bit. But this website's really great. It tells you about all the different chords, and they actually tell you the 3 notes that make up each of the chords, and then they give you a visual for each of them. Isn't that amazing? So I can see right here, oh, A major, A, C sharp, E. Boom, got it. Oh, A minor down there. And this will at least help you identify them on the keyboard. But more importantly, if you know the 3 notes that each of the chords made up, you can see that on the sheet music and be like, oh, that's C, E, G, a C chord. So that helps translating it onto the sheet music as well. I actually have a story time. Back when I was first learning piano, it took me forever to learn new pieces because I didn't know all the little tricks that I'm teaching you right now. So my piano teacher, Mr. Armstrong, I know, the most piano teacher sounding name ever, one day he was like, all right, you are terrible at your chords and being able to identify these different things, and I can tell you're just looking at each individual note. It's taking you forever. So what we did is we spent weeks, it was probably months, where we'd spend the whole first half of the lesson, that was 30 minutes, but the lesson was an hour, so we spent 30 minutes just drilling chords. He would just say like 3 letters, C, E, G, and I'd be like, oh, that's a C major. A, C sharp, E, oh, that's A major. F sharp, A, C sharp, oh, I'd be like, oh, that's F minor. I had to know them that quick, and I had to know all the chord spellings, and chord spellings isn't C-H-O-R-D, it's, well, as I mentioned before, the 3 or 4 letters, sometimes 5, of what the individual notes that make up the chord. Anyway, long story short, after months and months of grueling practice on that, after we were done, I was able to learn pieces like twice as fast because, like I mentioned earlier, I could look at those and be like, oh, that's a C sharp major chord. And boom, you got it right on the piano. Let me see if I can do it right now. Boom, got it. I still got it after all these years. Of course, I practice it every now and again, and eventually it will become second nature to you. So that's how badly you need to be practicing these chords and how much you need to become familiar with them. Now that we've laid the foundation with basic note reading strategies and some advanced ones, it's now time for the main course of today, which is reading both clefs at the same time. Here are 8 tips. Tip number 1 is to practice note reading every single day. I gave you a website to practice. You can get note cards or something like that off of Amazon, but you want to be practicing this, especially in the early years of piano. Yes, years you want to be practicing this. You need to be going through them, getting them as fast as you can. And I also recommend trading off between treble clef and bass clef, not just reading one or the other all the time, because you need to have these things, I mentioned this before, you need them mastered separately, so when you put them together, it will be easy peasy. Speaking of which, in the note identification exercise on musictheory.net, of course, you can actually select something special here, and that is the grand staff. And what this will do is this will give you the note on either the treble clef or the bass clef, alternating between each one. And you want to practice this because it's going to help you shift gears between each clef, which is what you're going to need when you start to put these together. Tip 2 is common sense, but not so common, because a lot of students struggle with this because they make this mistake. It doesn't matter whether it's sight reading or learning new pieces. They make this one mistake. Are you ready? They are trying to play something too complicated for what they're trying to learn at the time. So for example, if you are just learning how to put both of these clefs together, it doesn't make sense to play something really complicated. And a lot of students are trying to play like their favorite pop song or their favorite classical piece they've always wanted to play, and they put it hands together and they just can't read both clefs at once. And this makes sense. When you are first reading both clefs together, you want to make it as easy as possible. I especially recommend pieces that have like a chord in your left hand, simple melody in your right hand, something like Jingle Bells or some sort of nursery rhyme. You want to start easier, and if you're really struggling, look for something easier than what you're trying to practice. Tip number 3 is to read from the bottom to the top every single time. Never any other way. You want to be as consistent as possible, but let me show you how this works with both clefs at once. So say I have these 4 notes here. Now I have 2 clefs, so I said bottom and the top. Do I do right hand first or left hand? No, I mean quite literally the lowest note to the highest note. So you're actually going to be reading these left hand notes first and then the treble clef notes. And even when you're reading music, you should do it just like that. I mean, obviously they're supposed to be played at the same time, but when you're figuring these out the first time, it doesn't help. It doesn't hurt, rather. It doesn't help. It doesn't hurt to kind of lay out the notes separately and then play them together once you are ready. So bottom to the top, never any other way. Tip number 4, look at music in vertical columns. So when we're looking at music, especially rhythmically, actually, it really helps to look at music in columns because it's telling you what notes are being played at once. So in this column here, I see that I have a, we talked about that already, C major chord, and then I have a rest up top, so I know that I'm not playing anything. And then once I know that I have that column correct, guess what? You move on to the next column, which is the next beat in that measure, and look, it's kind of the opposite, where you have a chord up here, but nothing down there. And then obviously I'd move on to the next column, and I play it, and then once you got that column, and move on to the next one. This really helps you figure out what hand you're supposed to be playing at what time, or maybe all at once, and it also helps it rhythmically because you know that if it doesn't line up in a column, they're probably not played at the same time. And very important, only move on to the next column once you get that column correct, and that will make sure that you're not making mistakes along the way and not fixing them. Real quick quiz. You're looking at something in a vertical column. What notes do you read first? Bottom to the top. I have more tips on reading both clefs at the same time with some of the best tips coming up. But first, I just want to say thank you to all those who have supported the channel throughout the years, from the regular viewers to the members to the mods to people that sign up for courses over on my website, pianolessonsontheweb.com. I just want to say thank you so much for your support, and without it, we wouldn't have been able to reach as many students as we have. So I just want to say thank you. Next tip, when learning a piece as a beginner, it's okay to learn both hands separately first, before you even try putting them together. So like a year ago in the comments, somebody was telling me, Tim, you play Für-Elise all the time as an example, and you're not allowed to do it anymore. And I said, okay, I wouldn't. But that was last year. Anyway, the point is if I'm learning Für-Elise for the first time, it might be too much, and a lot of students I've taught this piece to struggle putting both hands at the same time, especially with these very large gaps while playing. So it really helps to learn one hand at a time. And once, it's just like learning to read music one clef at a time. Once you have the different parts mastered, when you put them together, all of a sudden, it's way easier because I know where my left hand's going to be hitting and all my right hand notes as well. So just like you might want to learn a piece hands separately first and then put them together, you may want to separate other elements and isolate them first, master them. And what am I talking about? I'm talking about the rhythm. Learning this toccata and fugue in D minor, and there's one problem. The rhythm looks awfully tricky, right? And then there's kind of some tricky notes here. It might be a lot to take in if you're learning this piece for the first time or if you're just starting out. So what I like to do is first just go through and learn the notes, and just kind of ignore the rhythm for now and focus on getting the right pitches. And then I'd learn the right hand, same thing, kind of ignoring the rhythm. And then after I have that learned, say it's still hard to put both together all at once, I would then just isolate the rhythm. Bum, bum, ba, 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 ba. And then I would try it. And there, I got the rhythm and the pitches. So just like how you would break it up hands separate, don't be afraid to separate the rhythm and work on those aspects separately as well. And you can kind of get the theme of what we're talking about today. If you master something separately, putting it together is way easier. Next tip, start with, get this, one measure at a time. You don't have to the first day get from the beginning of the piece to the end of the piece and be like, oh man, in the beginning I could play it hands together, but then it kind of fell apart. But because my goal was to really get to the end of the piece, there's tons of mistakes along the way and it just doesn't sound very good. So by starting with one measure at a time, nailing that down, it not only gives you something digestible and easy to accomplish in a practice session, but it keeps you from being overwhelmed. And then more importantly, it keeps you from skipping mistakes. We talked about that before with the vertical columns thing. What did I say? You can only move on to the next column if all the notes are wrong? No, you can only move on to the next column if all the notes are correct. So this kind of goes in line with that. You don't want to make the goal, oh, I got to get to the end. Just make it, I got to be accurate. It doesn't matter if we get through one measure, three measures, a whole line, or a whole page. It doesn't matter. Just focus on accuracy, especially if you're just starting out. All right, the next tip, believe it or not, it's the most important tip of all music. It is to read slow as you need to go. You don't need to play the piece at full speed. In fact, it'll be very detrimental to you. And so you want to be reading very slow in the columns, making sure you got it all right, and then moving on to the next one. It may seem like it's going to take way longer to learn your pieces, but trust me, as you get used to all the things I'm talking about and you integrate them in your practice, it will become like second nature to you, and you will be able to read through music doing the columns, being accurate, being slow, all that stuff. You'll be able to do that stuff as a process much faster as you go along. So even though it seems like it's going to take a lot longer, by getting this done ahead of time, you're actually paving the road for easy, oh, I like that saying, paving the road for like future success. The last tip, which I would incorporate after you incorporate everything else, is to practice out of a church hymnal. These are really great because church hymnal music, in the way it is everything lines up in those vertical columns very nicely. It doesn't have super complicated rhythms or hand independence that you have to worry about. It's so in line with everything I've been talking about today, and these are the perfect pieces to practice. There are even some resources online for church hymnals. One such website is openhymnal.org, and you can just click on any of these, and go to PDF image of score, or GIF if that's your preferred format. And this is exactly what I was talking about, where both hands are playing at the exact same time, and the rhythms between both hands are almost exactly the same. Ooh, sounds very church hymnally. Oh, and why wouldn't I go on from there? Because I clearly made a mistake. And remember, we're not moving on when we make mistakes. But you see how everything lines up in a vertical column? It's just perfect for practicing both hands at the same time. Although this is probably something you're going to want to work up to. Like I said, some of the easier like chord and melody structure things, like Jingle Bells, you know, like is probably where you want to start, because all I'm playing is C major chords while I'm playing a melody up top. But the church hymnal is perfect once you get through all the basic topics. So at the beginning of this lesson, I talked about the importance of how important it is to master note reading separately before you start to put it together. And we went over a lot of these basic things real quick so we could get to the hands together part of this lesson. So if you wanted a really, really in-depth look into reading music and these more advanced strategies of reading music fast, you want to check out this lesson right here. It's the perfect one to watch after this one. And if you're already a note reading master and you want to really learn how to play piano really well, you want to check out my courses over on my website, pianolessonsontheweb.com. Use code YouTube for an additional 15% off. So that's all for today. Your piano teacher, Tim here, and I'll see you in the next lesson. Have a great one.